Trojans Talk Research is a monthly spotlight on the research interests of Troy's faculty presented by Troy University's Office of Sponsored Programs. This month, Dr. Priya Menon will present Real Journeys, exploring liminal spaces in Kerala's migrant narratives and cinema.
So thank you for having me on this forum. I want to especially thank OSP and Paula for being persistent for almost a year now in getting me to present here. This is a work in progress, a part of my monograph. Narratives of migration are often framed in terms of endpoints, assimilation or integration. Yet their most defining characteristic is liminality, that in-between zone, or like Salman Rushdie would say, being on the threshold, where the outside world meets the world inside you, where there are the constant negotiations of identity in spaces of transition. Departure, arrival, displacement, and uncertainty mark the migrant experience not as a step towards a teleological culmination, but as a continual process of reconfiguration. Rather than focusing on static outcomes, I argue that migrant subjectivities emerge dynamically within these in-between spaces, shaped by intersecting factors of ethnicity, culture, gender, and class. My talk today focuses on Kerala, a state located at the southernmost tip of India. Kerala's history and identity have been deeply shaped by centuries of migration, both within India and across the world. These experiences are powerfully reflected in its cinema, in its native language called Malayalam, which often explores themes of dislocation, longing, and the complex realities of migrant life. On careful examination, we notice that migration amplifies liminality, unsettling familiar structures while generating new possibilities for selfhood. Keralans, or Malayalis, that is, people from Kerala, whose migrations span the globe, exemplify this flux. The Kerala Migration Survey 2023 estimates that 8 million Keralans live outside the state, 5 million abroad, 2 of us here right now, right? And 3 million within India, underscoring migration as both a necessity and a means of self-reinvention. The politics of migration, then, is not merely about economic survival, but about negotiating loss and renewal, where home remains an evolving provisional space rather than a fixed identity or reality. So this is, let me just put up the cursor. So you know India, and this is the tip of India. This is Kerala. It's cocooned between the Arabian Sea on the one side and the Western Ghats on the other. And because of its geographical location, you can see, you can imagine plenty of trade routes from times immemorial. Right now, we are getting a lot of information in terms of excavation, etc., the kind of people and places from where they had traveled. So it sits, it sits in a very prime spot to explore migration, if you will, and it is mirrored in the ways in which people cook, dress, look, etc. It's a fascinating study in a migratory dynamic, if you will. I want to focus on 2 films today. One is Adur Gopalakrishnan's Videyan. Gopalakrishnan has been referred to as an auteur in many ways. I don't know whether that's a good thing or not, but a fabulous filmmaker. And Kamal Majid's Gaddama. These are 2 semi-popular films on migration, written or done in the native language, Malayalam. One depicting intrastate migration, that is migration not just from India outside, but within different states of India. So Videyan, I'm looking at, the movie that I'm looking at, is set somewhere here between the northern state from Kerala, which is Karnataka, and Kerala. So you have a migrant laborer moving, or rather a tenant, moving from Kerala to here. It's a place called Dakshina Kannada. It's just like a liminal space, if you will, where movements, language, people, etc. Have or reflect that sort of a liminal state. So that is Videyan, intra-state migration, and the other one exploring transnational labor migration to the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. So from Kerala all the way up to Saudi Arabia here. So two films that talk about migration from Kerala, one intrastate and the other one across countries. In Gaddama, a female laborer in Saudi Arabia navigates the constraints of systemic oppression, her existence suspended between servitude and resistance. In Videyan, the oppressor-oppressed dynamic within internal migration destabilizes notions of home and power, revealing liminality as both a site of subjugation and potential reimagining. These films demonstrate that migration does not lead to fixed identities, but unfolds in a continuous state of flux where belonging is always contingent and transformation ongoing. Videyan is a 1993 film that examines liminality within a feudal lord-tenant relationship. In Malayalam, it would be called the Patelar-Kudiyan relationship, particularly focusing on the tension between the desire for home, migration, desire for home, and class dynamics, tenant, master, slave, tenant, feudal lord, if you will, and class dynamics that both sustain and subvert this desire. Okay, this is the first film that we want to talk about. Set in feudal Dakshina Kannada along the Kerala-Karnataka border during 1960s, and that year is important because it's post-independence. India won independence in 1947. So this film is set in 1960, post-independence, slavery is illegal, feudal system is disintegrating, if you will. Yet, it explores the relationship between, especially the power dynamics between the powerful feudal chief, ongoing feudal chief, if you will, Bhaskar, and the subjugated settler there, Tommi, a migrant from interiors of Kerala, which is a place called Wayanada in Kerala, rather poor place. So he's moved out of Kerala and he's wanting to settle down. He's looking for some opportunities in this liminal space. The film can be hastily dismissed as a crude political critique, a recounting of feudal slavery, abject violence, all that is there, abuse and domination from the point of view of the oppressed, which is Tommi. However, a more nuanced reading confirms that the film focuses not so much on the plight of the oppressed as on the dynamics of oppression itself, most relevantly articulated when oppression expresses itself in relation to the conceptual categories of the presence or absence of home. The film poses pressing questions. Though set in independent India, why does the enslaved subject, and you can see him here, Tommi, acquiesce to the status of being enslaved? He's not tied to the master in any way. I'm calling him the master, but he's just, a feudal lord in that part of the world. He is not entitled to Tommi in any way. There is no contract of any sort where they are connected to one another. Yet, look at this is one of the first shots in the movie. This is how he presents himself. He's afraid to speak, he's bowing down, that attitude of always already, if you will, has been established. So, why does he acquiesce to the status of being enslaved? From what place does this complicity of submission arise? Is subservience absolute in power relations? Is there a venue for possible resistances within the restrictive plasma of power for the powerless here? Rather than portraying power as a static, top-down hierarchy Vidayan presents it as an interaction marked by constantly shifting liminal symbiosis, a dynamic in which established roles, that of the master and slave, if you will, are perpetually in the process of being made and remade. In Vidayan, power is not merely imposed from above, but is constantly negotiated through a dialectic of recognition and dependence, very much evocative of Hegel's master-slave dialectic. I don't want to go into the Hegelian dialectic today, but you will see it being reflected here. The relationship between Bhaskar, the feudal landlord, and Tommi, the tenant, exemplifies this dialectic. Bhaskar, the lord, in his assertion of absolute dominance, paradoxically later on becomes dependent on Tommi, the one who's in the slave position. He's not a slave, right? He's in the position of slave, becomes dependent on Tommi for the recognition of his authority. Tommi, despite his subjugation, holds an implicit power. His eventual assertion of agency, I'll discuss this in a few minutes, he does express agency in certain moments, and those are those liminal moments that are so fascinating to me, destabilizes the very hierarchy that binds him to the feudal chief. This dynamic reveals that oppression does not function through rigid binaries, but rather through moments of transgression and mutual recognition. Let me explain. Tommi exists in a space where submission is expected. Okay, he's poor. You can see, by the quality of his clothes, the way he stands, presents himself. He's a migrant, poor, helpless. Yet his consciousness of subjugation introduces moments of resistance. Bhaskar, on the other hand, oscillates between absolute authority and an unsettling dependence on Tommi, revealing the fragility of his own power. The master-slave dialectic unfolds in a series of liminal moments where the boundaries of domination or dominance and submission are tested and redefined. I'll outline 3 key moments in the film that explores this. One of the key moments of liminality occurs when Bhaskar, in an uncharacteristic gesture, seeks advice from Tommi. Bhaskar asks Tommi whether his own wife, Saroja, whom he has just murdered, would know if her own death were by his hands. I wonder if I can play this. Perhaps after the presentation I'll play a bit of that. But this is the shot. So he's completely dependent on Tommi here. The plot has been set. The master has exerted his assertion for individual dignity, if in the Hegelian sense of this mutual recognition. Bhaskar knows that he is the master. Tommi is made to do all sorts of ordeals for him. Go fetch that, do this, etc. And Tommi, through his work, learns that the master is not as powerful as he presents himself to be. Right? That is a moment of recognition there. But it hasn't happened as yet. Right here, what's going on is that Bhaskar, the master, has killed his wife, okay, because he's a ruthless person. And he doesn't need to do anything. He controls the entire environment there. He doesn't need to prove to anyone that, or establish himself or get permission or pardon his sins, if you will, from anyone in that vicinity, let alone Tommi. But he goes back to Tommi in certain key moments in the film and asks, do you think she would have recognized that I am the one who killed her? So he covers her face before killing her, okay? And and goes back a couple of times and asks him this. And I'd like to play this to you for you at the end of the film. He even shows or offers his hands to Tommy and say, touch my hands and tell me, do you know when you touch my hands that it is my hands, right? So he's wanting that sort of a recognition from Tommy, that sort of, more than recognition, that sort of comfort, right? He's dependent, the master is dependent on Tommy for his emotional existence here. So Tommy exists in a space where submission is expected. He's a migrant, poor and helpless, yet his consciousness of subjugation introduces moments of resistance, like we said. And one in particular is when this particular murder has happened. Bhaskar asks Tommy whether his own wife, Saroja, whom he has just murdered, would know if her own death were by his hands. He asks, would she have recognized the touch of my hands? This question momentarily destabilizes the hierarchy between them. Bhaskar, typically the enforcer of power, turns to Tommy, who is usually the passive recipient of his violence, for reassurance. This moment of uncertainty disrupts the established order, acknowledging Tommy's agency in a way that contradicts their otherwise rigid relationship. In this instance, Bhaskar requires Tommy's recognition to validate his own actions, exposing the master's dependence on the slave. Similarly, Bhaskar's rare moments of care for Tommy and his wife introduces another instance of liminality. Although Bhaskar's relationship is built on systemic oppression, the film offers rare moments of care when Bhaskar's character becomes humanized. He even offers them clothing, food, and provides shelter. He doesn't need to. Right? There's no binding of any sort. There's no contract, but he does. The humanization disrupts the assumption that oppression is monolithic, revealing fractures within the structure of domination where vulnerability seeps in. Tommy, too, unsettles the dynamic through his affection for Saroja, Bhaskar's wife. These shifts suggest that neither the master nor the slave remains entirely fixed in these prescribed roles. Instead, they navigate as an ever-shifting dynamic where dominance and submission coexist with an undercurrent of mutual recognition. The mutual dependence between Bhaskar and Tommy further reinforces the film's exploration of liminality. While Tommy initially accepts his subservience, he gradually recognizes that his survival does not entirely hinge on Bhaskar's power. Likewise, Bhaskar, despite his dominance, becomes increasingly reliant on Tommy's presence, suggesting that his authority is not an absolute as it appears. This reciprocal dependence challenges the notion that power is one-directional. Rather, it operates in an unstable space where both men find themselves entangled in a structure they simultaneously reinforce and resist. The master requires the slave to affirm his dominance, yet that very requirement the master concedes to his reliance on the slave's recognition. So it's a mutual dependence. The concept of home in Vidayan operates as both a site of oppression and potential avenue for liberation. For Bhaskar, home is linked to control and stability. For Tommy, it signifies displacement and precarity. The paradox of home emerges through their differing perspective. While Tommy seeks a space of belonging beyond subjugation, Bhaskar's sense of home is bound by his ability to exert dominance. This duality reveals how the very desire for home, whether in the form of stability, power, or freedom, can both entrap and liberate. The film suggests that home is not fixed space, but rather a shifting concept, one that can either reinforce existing hierarchies or provide the means to escape them. For both Bhaskar and for Tommy, Bhaskar is a lord only because he's in his home territory, and Tommy is a slave only because he is without a home and is searching for a home in the territory that Bhaskar sort of surveils over. And this is one of the few scenes when you see Tommy being happy when Bhaskar asks him whether he wants any food, if he's comfortable, etc. And you see that smile on Tommy's face. One of the a few moments in the film. In the final act of the film, and when you watch the film, which I hope you will see there's a symbol, if you will, is always of a gun that Bhaskar carries with him. Obviously, power, manipulation, etc. But in the final act of the film, Tommy's rejection of Bhaskar's power reaches its culmination when he is actually brave enough to pick up the gun, right? This is Bhaskar's gun. He's never touched it before. And he picks it up and throws the gun into a river. This daring act, of course, Bhaskar is dead by then, right? Yet Tommy, it's a masterfully crafted film. Bhaskar dies, and you see this person who has undergone so much suffering because of Bhaskar just breaking down and crying for this individual who has tortured him. But after that, this is the last moment. He's able to pick up the gun and throws it into the river. This daring act symbolizes Tommy's movement towards self-sufficiency, serving or severing his dependence on the structures that once defined him. However, this liberation remains partial because he was only able to pick it up after Bhaskar's death. Tommy's identity is still shaped by the legacy of his subjugation. His rejection of Bhaskar does not erase the past, but instead marks a transition into a new, uncertain space. Ultimately, Videyan presents a complex exploration of liminality, where the boundaries between master and slave, home and exile, oppression and freedom remain fluid. The film resists simplistic notion of power and subjugation, instead revealing how rigid structures are both upheld and undermined in liminal moments of transgression and recognition. The desire for home, while offering glimpses of possibility, is continually mediated by these unstable dynamics. I also want to discuss external migration from Kerala to the Gulf states and how it gets represented in Malayalam cinema. Based on a true report by K.U. Iqbal, Kamal Majid's filmic adaptation, Khaddama in Arabic, which means the servant, right? But this is in Malayalam. So you know the history of migration from Kerala to the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, where Arabic is the dominant language. So we have a Malayalam film with an Arabic title, right? That gets written in Malayalam in this film, and this is a Kerala girl in an Arabic abaya. This particular film follows the life of Ashwati, a young woman from Kerala, forced to migrate to the Gulf for domestic work, revealing the harsh realities and challenges of this experience. I must add a caveat that not everybody who goes to the Gulf undergoes this sort of a trajectory. Sometimes when we discuss these works, if we do not provide that, we end up historicizing only certain narratives that may not be true. Triggered by economic and social insecurity, Ashwati is forced to seek employment abroad. As a widow, she bears the burden of caring not only for her parents, but also for her deceased husband's parents. When a local migrant from Saudi Arabia, working as an illegal recruiting agent, offers her a job as a gattama, a domestic worker, that's a translation of that term, in a household in Buremi, some 400 kilometers from the capital of Saudi Arabia, Riyadh, so the interiors of Saudi Arabia, she accepts the offer without much investigation. This film is based on a true story, true event. Usman, the recruiting agent, is a fellow Kerala or a Malayali, but lacks formal recruiting knowledge. or authority. As an employee of the same household in Buremi, he fails to disclose to Ashwati that by accepting his offer, she would fall under the kafala system, where she would be legally, financially, and socially bound to the sponsor, that is the native Arab, with little to no autonomy in a foreign country. So I just want to pause for a minute to look at how oppression functions here. It's not the Arab master that actually takes her. It is that withholding of information by a fellow Malayali that entraps her and gets her across. Of course, there is oppression in the Arab household, but it's just not exclusive to that place. And it's exacerbated by this particular system that operates employment contracts in that part of the world, which is called the kafala system, wherein the sponsor, anyone of us can be employed in the Gulf Cooperation Council countries. You are under the care of a kafil, that is a sponsor, and he, almost always he, I think, holds complete responsibility over you. It was meant initially, it comes from an Islamic concept, and it was meant to actually benefit migrants who travel to those parts of the world, wherein somebody who is in the country could look after, take care of this guest who is coming into the country. Obviously, it has had its side effects, if you will, and a lot of abuse has happened because of not restricting or not formalizing the kafala system in that part of the world. Ashwati's trajectory is not merely a narrative of economic exploitation. It is a profound exploration of liminality. From the moment she arrives, the film situates her in in-between spaces. Airport terminals, in between, immigration queues, and a passport stamping counter. A striking close-up of her retina being scanned reinforces this sense of surveillance. She's watched as we watch her. The film's visual language underscores her entrapment, framing her within the rigid structures of migration, power, and control. Her experience is emblematic of a state of in-betweenness, where she is caught between two worlds, neither fully at home in her native Kerala, nor completely absorbed by the alien environment of Saudi Arabia. The film also underscores how migration imposes precarity on women at society's margins, exposing them to displacement, violence, and tasks. Violence and fragmentation as they struggle for economic survival in both India and the Gulf. Framing Ashwati's journey through the lens of liminality, the film portrays a movement from Kerala to Saudi Arabia as a transition from one precarious existence to another. In Kerala, she's confined to the domestic sphere, first as a pickle factory worker supporting her aging parents, and later as a housewife restricted by her husband's authority to be employed. When widowed and financial desperation sets in, it forces her to migrate. She steps into, what happens then is, she steps into yet another liminal state, neither fully belonging to her home country nor finding stability in the host country. Her arrival in Saudi Arabia marks a deeper entrenchment in this liminal space. Stripped of agency, she's immediately subjected to the exploitative kafala system. Her passport is confiscated, and her identity is reduced to that of a disposable laborer. Her existence within the employer's household is one of total surveillance and subjugation. Cooking, cleaning, and tending to the family without rest, forcing her into what Astrid Solberg terms submissive malleability. Whether cooking, cleaning, or caring for the children and elderly members of the host family, Ashwati is always on call with no personal space and constant surveillance by all members of the household. She's given a little room by the courtyard and is called upon middle of the night. There's no rest days for her at all. The film's visual language reinforces her liminality. Shots of her performing repetitive domestic tasks emphasize the tension between intimate bodily labor and the larger impersonal structures of economic and social control. Gaddama complicates the narrative of domestic labor by exposing the inherent contradictions in the role Ashwati is forced to perform. On the one hand, she is indispensable to the functioning of a household that promises economic stability. On the other, her labor is systematically devalued. This tension, the painful cost of human labor, is rendered even more potent by its liminal quality, as it reveals how the very acts of survival can become spaces of both exploitation and resistance. Crucially, Gaddama disrupts linear narrative of progress using flashbacks and jump cuts between Saudi Arabia and Kerala to collapse the distance between the two spaces, and it's visually stunning. So you have this brown desert sand on the one side, and then it suddenly shifts in her memory to Kerala, which is green and lots of water and rain, etc. Kerala is often called a land where the rain is born. You know, it's raining, something like the UK, if you will, but with people who smile all the time. But you know, it's a very green landscape, and it's visually stunning and very stark contrast as well. This cinematic technique underscores her liminality. Her rightlessness as a migrant is an extension of her marginalization at home. In one particularly harrowing scene, the young boy of the household slashes her arm with a glass shard, a violent act that mirrors the economic and social wounds she has endured across borders. By contrasting fragments of her past with her present struggles in the Gulf, Gaddama visually maps the discontinuities in her sense of belonging. These flashbacks, much like fragmented close-ups, evoke the lost unity of a coherent identity, signifying instead that her existence is marked by a continual, open-ended negotiation of selfhood. Ultimately, migration does not offer Ashwati liberation, but rather deepens her entrapment, reinforcing the film's central thesis. For women like her, movement does not signify transition, but the perpetuation of subjugation in different forms. As Ashwati prepares to escape the oppressive conditions of her Kafil's home, the film employs a series of striking visual moments that highlight her movement through liminal spaces, announcing her struggle for autonomy. A poignant shot through a doorway where she is seen donning an abaya in preparation to leave marks a physical and metaphorical shift from confinement to the uncertainty of escape. The empty gas station and the long winding roads that follow, with a close-up of Ashwati's determined face, emphasizes her isolation and emotional distance that she must cover. I think it's here, yeah. She must cover to flee. The gas station in particular serves as a powerful liminal space. Traditionally a place of transit, it represents a threshold between Ashwati's life of subjugation and the unknown future that lies ahead. Its emptiness amplifies her sense of isolation. There are no people, no clear direction, only the quiet tension of a moment suspended in time. The absence of activity in this space reflects Ashwati's own position. She's neither fully here nor there, neither a Kerala nor a Gaddama at this moment, existing in a state of suspension between space and time. As Ashwati moves along the long winding desert road, framed in the foreground, the barren landscape underscores a sense of isolation and the immense physical and emotional distance she must traverse to escape. The road stretches out ahead, endless and uncertain, indicative of both the literal and figurative journeys she's undertaking, one fraught with risk, but driven by her determination to assert control over her fate, even as the landscape remains vast and indifferent to her struggle. These cinematic strategies reconfigure the narratives of migration, bringing climatic juxtapositions, urging us to see Ashwati not merely as an exploited migrant laborer, but as a subject whose agency unfolds through her efforts to escape. The liminal spaces she navigates highlight the process of survival and resistance as she moves between the oppressive structure of the system and the uncertain prospect of self-determination. In escaping, Ashwathi does not experience a seamless transition. She's punished and jailed. I won't spoil the plot for you, but she uses what limited agency she possesses to break free from the constraints imposed on her, thereby averting the fate of her becoming one of the countless unknown Indians that the film frequently evokes. And that's, this particular image is shot throughout, like inserted throughout the film for a good reason, because it explores what systems and lack of personal safety gets a migrant, especially from a country like India, end up facing in the Gulf. So this is a very stark image. Nonetheless, this gets juxtaposed with Ashwathi's escape, letting us know that there is some agency in her personality. Ultimately, Gaddama challenges us to rethink the boundaries between exploitation and agency by revealing the liminal spaces of migration, those in-between zones where identities are not fixed but are constantly remade. They are also sites of potential resistance and transformation. Whether in the diasporic remaking of cultural narratives among Keralans or in the intimate laboring hands of Ashwathi, these interstitial spaces hold the potential for reimagining identity and power. Films like Videyan and Gaddama reveal how migration destabilizes rigid structures of power, belonging, and home by remaining in flux. The master-slave dynamic in Videyan and the precarity of domestic labor in Gaddama underscore how liminality shapes and reshapes migrant experiences, exposing the tension between oppression and agency, rather than framing migration as a linear trajectory with endpoints. These films reveal it as an ongoing process of adaptation and resistance, where the search for stability is always conditional. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I wonder if I'd be able to show. So she's just landed, and she's stranded in the airport for 3 days. This is a real, and often spoken about instance where the kafil doesn't come to pick up the guest. Right? They're stranded in the airport, sometimes for up to 5 to 6 days. So she's just landed.
മുമ്പ് 5-6 കൊല്ലം ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നു ഇവിടെ. പണിയെടുത്ത് എല്ലും നടും ഇടിഞ്ഞപ്പോ ഒക്കെ മതിയാക്കി പോയതാ. എന്നിട്ടെന്താ, നാട്ടിലെ ദുരിതവും കഷ്ടപ്പാടും തീരണ്ടേ, പിന്നെയും പോന്നു. കേൾക്കണവർക്കൊക്കെ എന്താ രസം, ഗൾഫുകാരത്തിയല്ലേ. എന്താ നിങ്ങളെ പേര്?
അശ്വതി.
അറബീന്റെ വീട്ടിൽ ചെന്നാ ഓല് പേര് മാറ്റും, ഓലുക്ക് തോന്നിയത് വിളിക്കും, ഇല്ലെങ്കിൽ ഗദ്ദാമാന്ന്.
So she says that your name is Ashwati, but don't be surprised if your name is going to be changed as soon as you land up in your kafil's house. They're going to call you whatever they want to. And this is what she ends up looking like. She cannot be herself in the country that she adopts, if you will. This is during her escape. So you see the landscape there. And then you see, before that, you'll see shots from Kerala, which is very different. There's water. So that's Gadama. I love to show a scene from Vidayan, if possible. I have the link here, and then we can discuss if there are any questions. You can see the chair, but it's broken chair. It's a broken chair. It doesn't have the handle here. You can see the gun, right? That's the opening shot. So this is he's just sitting there. He's just come to this place, and he's sitting there, and Bhaskar just calls him. He's wondering who's calling him. So the only piece of cloth that he's tied around his waist is torn. He gets torn. So dignity. He already has his hands over his mouth.
എന്താണടാ നിന്റെ മട്ടേ കയ്യില്? ഒന്നുമില്ലേ. പിന്നെ എന്തിനാടാ പട്ടി നീ ഇവരെ കൈ പുറകിൽ പിടിച്ചിരിക്കുന്നത്? നിനക്ക് ടൂറാൻ മുട്ടുന്നുണ്ടോ?
ബഹുമാനിക്കേണ്ടവരെ കണ്ടാൽ നിനക്ക് ബഹുമാനിക്കാൻ അറിഞ്ഞൂടെ?
ഇങ്ങ് അടുത്തു വാടാ.
Calls him master already. This is after he's killed Saroja. Now they're riding together.
എനിക്ക് നിന്നെ കൊണ്ട് ആവശ്യമുണ്ട്. നീ ധൈര്യമായിരുന്നു. ഏടാ ഞാനാണ് കൊന്നതെന്ന് അവൾ അറിഞ്ഞില്ല. മുഖത്ത് തോർത്തു കെട്ടി ഇരുട്ടത്ത് ജനലിൽ കൂടി കയറി വന്നാണ് വെടിക്കൂടിയത്. പക്ഷേ അവളെന്റെ കൈകളിൽ പിടിച്ചു.
Tone is very different.
അതേ ഉള്ളൂ എന്റെ സംശയം. എന്റെ കൈകളാണെന്ന് തൊട്ടപ്പോൾ അവൾക്ക് മനസ്സിലായി കാണോ? ഏടാ സരോജയെ ഞാൻ മനഃപൂർവ്വം കൊന്നതല്ലെന്ന് എനിക്കറിയാലോ. സരോജ
ನಾನು ನಿನ್ನನ್ನು ಕೊಂದಿಲ್ಲ, ಒಂದು ಅಚಾತುರ್ಯ ಆಗಿಬಿಡ್ತು.
And he didn't need to tell Tommy any of that, you know, but he becomes vulnerable in those moments and reveals himself to Tommy. So thank you so much for any questions. I'm happy to take notes. This is a part of a monograph that I'm working on that explores migration. So any suggestions, comments, I'm grateful for that. We have somebody coming actually from Kerala here. So she's a student. So I hope you were able, have you seen these films?
Like, I watched the second movie, Gadamo. I didn't watch this movie.
The first one?
Yeah, first one I didn't.
Now you have homework. No, I'm kidding. Yeah, Jill.
Oh, thank you so much, Priya. Dr. Menon. And thanks for this whole forum. This was very wonderful to hear these, your construction of this kind of notion that things are, migration and home is something that's kind of remade and made even through these power dynamics. They're different. But I wondered if you could talk a little bit more, it's very, very basic, my questions, speak a little bit more about liminality. Because I'll just say what kind of motivates my question or my thinking here is that, like, what if liminality is actually centrality? You know what I mean? So it's like, I think I understand how you're using liminality, but I wondered if you could just speak about that a little bit more.
Yeah, and of course, with the literature and theory background, we know how the term or the concept of liminality gets constructed, right? For me here, it was to tie these two texts using key moments of transition. So I'm using liminality in that sense. In the sense of transitory points or interstitial spaces where you're neither here nor there. And if you look at that, it forms the centrality of the migrant experience, because when you migrate, as much as you want to, and with Rushdie's very famous dictum, if you will, you're neither here nor there, right? And home is always a lost concept. You can never retain or recapture that home, be it in your host country or in your home country. You go back home after 10 years, and then you think to yourself, this is not how I imagined it to be. This house is smaller than what I thought it to be 10 years ago, and there was a big tree in front of my house. Where did that go? Apparently there was never a tree. So and one could argue that it can happen anywhere. It needn't be migration that brings this or that allows for this sort of a discussion. But to your point, migration makes it a central issue, right? Because whether you are looking at identity formation, because you're in the margins, right? You're always in the margins. Look at our current situation here. You're always in the margins being a migrant, right? But then if you look at those margins, you have so much activity and action that happens there that it becomes a space for resistance, to reclaim your identity, if you will, not in the ways that it was when you had arrived at that spot, but in new forms of subjecthood and selfhood, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think that echoes what you probably are aware of her work, Neha Vora.
Oh, of course, yes. Impossible Citizens. Yes.
So that even like the study of Indian, the creation of Indian subjectivity in Dubai is not just about that particularity. But in doing so, we sort of see how subjectivities everywhere are constructed.
That's right.
And I appreciate that lens.
Yeah.
So I appreciate this lens.
Thank you so much. Yeah, Neha Vora is a very important name in my work because she is one of the early contributors to this growing field, right? Like Deepak as well, but way before Deepak, I think Vora looks at it through an ethnographic lens, and it's very helpful and informative for us in the field of literature as well. Yeah, thank you for that question. Thank you very much.
Trojans Talk Research is a monthly spotlight on the research interests of choice faculty presented by Troy University's Office of Sponsored Programs.